It's strange when you think about it. Some religious beliefs sound like they were made up on the spot, almost like someone testing how far people can be pushed. And yet, millions of people take them seriously, live by them, and even pass them on to their children as sacred truth. If you stop for a moment, that should make you pause. Why do ideas that sound so bizarre, even unreasonable, still hold such power? That's what we're going to unpack together. Let's start with an example you've probably heard of: cows in India. In Hinduism, the cow is considered sacred, a symbol of life, nourishment, and nonviolence. That belief runs so deep that in many parts of India, cows can freely wander through busy city streets, blocking traffic, lying down in marketplaces, or even resting on highways. Drivers swerve around them, pedestrians step aside, and shopkeepers wait patiently for the animal to move on. No one dares to touch or harm them, not because it's inconvenient, but because it's unthinkable. You could be late for work, miss an appointment, or get stuck in a jam for hours. But the cow remains untouchable. On the surface, it might look absurd. But for those who believe, it's not about logic, it's about reverence, identity, and the weight of centuries of tradition. Now, contrast that with a modern story from South Korea. There's a sect known for believing that even though their pastor passed away years ago, he still holds spiritual authority over his followers. Think about that for a second. A leader who no longer exists physically is still treated as if he's guiding decisions, shaping lives, and watching over the group. Outsiders often shake their heads at this, but inside the sect, it feels completely natural. The members aren't following out of ignorance. They're following because it gives them certainty, belonging, and a sense that their lives are tied to something bigger than themselves. When you put these two examples side by side, the sacred cows in India and the pastor who continues to rule spiritually even in death, you start to see a pattern. Belief, no matter how strange it looks from the outside, has less to do with reason and more to do with meaning. People don't cling to these ideas because they're scientifically sound or logically consistent. They hold on because belief fulfills deep emotional and social needs. It offers identity, protection, and a framework for living in an uncertain world. This is the power of culture. When you're born into a system of belief, it doesn't feel odd at all. From childhood, you're taught stories, rituals, and values that become as natural as breathing. If you grow up hearing that the cow is sacred, then seeing a cow lie in the middle of the street isn't strange. It's holy. If your community believes a leader's spirit guides them even after death, then following his words years later feels like loyalty, not delusion. Outsiders might laugh, but insiders live by these beliefs as unquestioned truths. And here's where psychology steps in. Humans crave certainty. We want to know that our lives have meaning, that suffering isn't random, that someone or something is guiding the chaos. Religion provides exactly that. It gives a story to follow, a rule book to obey, and a sense of belonging to something eternal. Fear also plays a role. Many religions teach consequences for disobedience, sometimes as severe as eternal punishment. That kind of fear, planted early, can be powerful enough to keep people faithful for a lifetime. But it's not just fear, it's also love, comfort, and identity. Rituals create community. Festivals bring people together. Sacred objects and stories tie generations across time. For many, faith isn't about questioning, it's about belonging. To walk away from belief often feels like walking away from family, culture, and even one's own self. So, while to an outsider, sacred cows or a dead pastor ruling spiritually may sound absurd, inside their cultural and emotional framework, these beliefs make sense. They survive because they meet human needs that logic alone can't satisfy. They answer questions like, who am I? Why am I here? What happens when I die? And most importantly, who will walk with me through life's hardest moments? In the end, whether we're talking about ancient traditions in India or modern sects in South Korea, the lesson is the same. Belief is less about the content of the story and more about the power it has to shape lives. Once a narrative becomes sacred, once it's woven into identity and community, it doesn't matter how bizarre it might look from the outside. It becomes untouchable truth for those inside. Let's move on to another example. This one comes from Japan, and it shows us how religion can mix with tradition in ways that shape daily life. In Japanese Shintoism, there's a belief that spirits, or kami, live in natural objects like trees, rivers, mountains, and even stones. To outsiders, this might sound like pure superstition. How could a rock or a stream have a spirit living inside it? But for many Japanese people, it feels natural, even comforting. Imagine walking through a Shinto shrine. You'll see ancient trees wrapped with sacred ropes, small wooden plaques hanging with prayers, and people bowing respectfully to what looks like nothing more than a stone or a patch of earth. To them, that's not just a tree or just a rock. It's a living presence. It deserves respect. What's fascinating is how this belief influences behavior. Because nature is viewed as sacred, there's a cultural emphasis on harmony with the environment. Polluting a river or cutting down a sacred tree isn't only seen as bad for the planet, it's considered spiritually dangerous. You're not just harming nature, you're disturbing the spirits who live there. In this way, religious belief has shaped environmental awareness long before climate change ever became a global conversation. Now let's shift to another part of the world, Africa. In certain communities, there are still strong beliefs in witchcraft and curses. If someone suddenly gets sick, loses money, or has repeated bad luck, it's often explained as the result of a curse. Entire families might live in fear of someone in the village who's believed to be a witch. Outsiders may dismiss this as nonsense, but inside these communities, it shapes real decisions. People avoid certain neighbors, seek protection from spiritual healers, or spend large sums on rituals to remove curses. Here's what's interesting. Even though modern science has advanced, these beliefs haven't disappeared. They survive because they give people a framework for understanding the unexplainable. If something bad happens and there's no clear reason, it's psychologically easier to blame a curse than to accept that life can be random and unfair. The belief restores a sense of control. If a curse caused the problem, then maybe a ritual can fix it. Now, before we judge, let's be honest. Don't we all do something similar? Think about how many people knock on wood, avoid walking under ladders, or feel nervous about the number 13. These superstitions may not be as extreme as fearing a witch, but they come from the same human desire to explain uncertainty and feel a sense of safety. Let's add one more example, this time from Christianity. In some churches, there's a belief in faith healing, the idea that illnesses can be cured through prayer and laying on of hands. People gather in huge crowds, pastors pray over them, and some even collapse, convinced they've been touched by divine power. To skeptics, it looks like emotional manipulation, maybe even a performance, but to those who believe, it's real healing. There are countless testimonies of people saying their pain disappeared, their sickness was cured, or their lives changed after these encounters. Whether you see this as genuine miracle or placebo effect, it doesn't change the fact that belief is powerful enough to create real physical experiences. Science has long shown that the mind and body are deeply connected. The placebo effect alone proves that what you believe can influence how your body reacts. So in a way, faith healing works not just because of divine intervention, but because belief itself has real power. When you step back and look at all these examples, the sacred trees of Japan, the fear of curses in Africa, and faith healing in Christianity, you start to notice something. No matter where you go in the world, humans use belief to make sense of what they can't control. And here's the thing, belief doesn't have to be logical to be powerful. For those who follow, it doesn't matter if outsiders laugh or criticize. What matters is that the belief provides comfort, protection, and identity. This leads us to a deeper question. Are these beliefs harmful or helpful? The answer isn't simple. On one hand, certain beliefs can create fear, division, and even violence. People have been shunned, punished, or even killed in the name of religious ideas that, to outsiders, seem absurd. On the other hand, belief can bring people together, create community, and give hope in times of despair. Think about it. When someone loses a loved one, faith often provides the strength to keep going. When someone faces uncertainty, rituals and prayers can bring peace of mind. Even if the belief isn't objectively true, that its emotional truth can be powerful enough to shape reality for the believer. So the question isn't really about whether a belief sounds absurd. The real question is, what purpose does it serve for the people who hold it? Does it bring them peace or fear? Does it unite or divide? Does it help them live better or trap them in suffering? Belief at its core is a human tool. It's the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of life's mysteries. Some of those stories may sound strange, but every culture has them. Even in modern societies, we're not free from them. We just call them by different names. Instead of spirits and rivers, we talk about manifesting success. Instead of curses, we talk about bad energy. The language changes, but the need remains the same, to feel that life has meaning and that we have some control over it. So whether it's sacred cows in India, spirits in Japan, curses in Africa, or faith healing in America, the lesson is universal. Belief is less about facts and more about meaning. And as long as humans need meaning, beliefs, no matter how absurd they might look from the outside, will continue to shape our world. Let's dive deeper into how these beliefs survive and why they continue to shape the way people live, even in a modern world that's supposedly guided by science and reason. First, let's look at the role of tradition. When a belief has been passed down for centuries, it becomes more than just an idea. It becomes culture. Take the example of sacred cows in India again. For many Hindus, respecting cows isn't just a religious teaching, it's a cultural identity marker. Children grow up watching their parents feed cows, offer them garlands, or step aside when a cow crosses the street. By the time they're adults, the idea isn't questioned. It's simply part of who they are. You don't need logical proof when something has been woven into your identity from birth. The same goes for Shinto practices in Japan. Even people who don't consider themselves religious will still participate in rituals like visiting shrines on New Year's Day, writing wishes on wooden plaques, or respecting sacred trees. They might not even say they believe in spirits, but the customs remain alive because they connect people to their ancestors and to the rhythm of society. Then there's fear, the most powerful motivator of all. In parts of Africa where witchcraft beliefs remain strong, the fear of being cursed can be overwhelming. Imagine waking up every day thinking that a neighbor's jealousy could make you sick, or that a simple argument could invite misfortune into your life. Whether or not the curse is real doesn't matter. The fear is real, and fear has a way of keeping beliefs alive. Parents warn their children, communities spread stories, and before you know it, the belief has been reinforced for another generation. But it's not just fear, it's also hope. Faith healing, for instance, thrives because it offers people hope when medicine has failed them. Someone who has tried every treatment without success may turn to prayer as a last resort. And when even a small number of people report feeling better afterward, it fuels the cycle of belief. Hope is addictive. It doesn't matter if outsiders dismiss it as placebo. For those who are desperate, hope is enough to keep coming back. Now, let's talk about how modern technology has actually amplified these beliefs instead of eliminating them. You might think the internet would expose false ideas, but in reality, it often strengthens them. Social media allows like-minded believers to find each other, share stories, and create communities that validate their views. A person who once felt alone in their strange belief can now find thousands of others online who think the same way. That sense of community makes the belief harder to challenge. For example, conspiracy-style religious groups have flourished online. They mix bits of scripture with modern fears, and before long, you have entire movements built around ideas that outsiders would call absurd. But to insiders, these online spaces feel like proof. So many people believe this, it must be true. The digital age has created echo chambers where even the strangest beliefs can thrive. Here's another layer. Beliefs often provide answers to the big questions science can't fully satisfy. Science can explain how diseases happen, but it can't always answer why it happened to you. Religion steps into that gap with explanations like karma, curses, or divine testing. Science can describe the mechanics of death, but religion offers meaning: an afterlife, reincarnation, or reunion with loved ones. These are not small questions. They touch the deepest parts of human fear and longing. And as long as humans crave meaning, beliefs will outlive every scientific discovery. It's also important to see how belief intersects with power. Leaders, whether political, spiritual, or social, have often used belief systems to guide or control people. In some cases, this has led to harmony and unity. In others, it has caused division and conflict. When people truly believe that their ritual, their god, or their tradition is the only truth, they're willing to defend it fiercely, even at great cost. Wars have been fought, laws have been written, and entire civilizations have been shaped by ideas that to outsiders might seem bizarre. Let's pause for a moment and reflect. Why do humans cling so tightly to beliefs, even when they appear irrational? The answer lies in psychology. Belief provides certainty in an uncertain world. Life is unpredictable. Disease, death, disaster, betrayal, any of these can strike at any moment. Without belief, we're left face to face with chaos. Belief acts like a shield, softening life's blows. Even if the shield is imaginary, it still feels protective. But here's the paradox. Beliefs that protect can also imprison. A belief in curses might make you cautious, but it can also trap you in fear. A belief in sacred rituals can give you meaning, but it can also prevent you from questioning traditions that cause harm. A belief in divine healing might bring comfort, but it can also stop people from seeking real medical care. The line between helpful and harmful is thin, and often it depends on how the belief is used. That's why it's dangerous to dismiss these beliefs too quickly. When we laugh at others' traditions, we forget that our own cultures have their share of unusual ideas. Take a moment to think. Do you knock on wood for good luck? Do you avoid opening an umbrella indoors? Do you get nervous if Friday the 13th rolls around? These aren't rational, but they linger because they give us small comforts in daily life. The difference between a global religion and a local superstition is often just a matter of scale. So maybe the question isn't, why do people believe absurd things? But rather, what human need is this belief fulfilling? Because once you look at it that way, every belief starts to make sense, even if you don't share it. Here's the takeaway. Belief is one of the most powerful forces in human history. It has built temples, toppled empires, inspired revolutions, and healed broken hearts. Whether we call it superstition, religion, or tradition, it all comes from the same human impulse. The search for meaning, comfort, and control in a world that often feels uncontrollable. So next time you hear about a belief that sounds absurd, pause before you laugh. Ask yourself, what does this belief give to the people who hold it? Is it fear, hope, identity, or belonging? Because once you see that, you'll realize that what seems absurd on the surface is actually a mirror of the same needs we all share. And if you pause for a second and think about it, this is where it gets really interesting. Once a belief takes root, it doesn't just stay in someone's mind as an abstract thought. It becomes woven into their daily decisions, family traditions, and even national identity. Take the sacred cow example again. It's not simply about an animal walking down a street. It's about millions of people who, for generations, have been taught that showing reverence toward cows is a form of spiritual respect, almost like a daily act of devotion. So when someone in India sees a cow blocking traffic, they don't just see an animal. They see a living symbol of patience, purity, and divine presence. That's why even if outsiders might roll their eyes, for believers, the act of honoring the cow feels profoundly natural. Now shift over to the South Korean sect we mentioned earlier. Imagine following a leader so closely that even after they've died, their authority still shapes your life. To an outsider, that sounds irrational. But inside the community, people have invested years, sometimes decades, of trust, obedience, and loyalty. Their entire social world revolves around this figure. Friends, family, community events, even marriage choices can all be tied to the group. So when the leader passes away, letting go doesn't feel like an option. Instead, the belief adapts. The leader may be gone physically, but spiritually, they are still in charge. This keeps the structure intact and reassures members that their faith has not been wasted. Psychologists often explain this by pointing to something called cognitive dissonance. Basically, when people invest heavily in a belief, whether through time, money, or emotional energy, they don't want to admit that it might not be true. The cost of questioning it feels too high. So, rather than abandon the belief, they double down on it, sometimes creating even more elaborate explanations to protect it. This is why groups can end up believing ideas that seem extreme, even when evidence is stacked against them. And it's not just about psychology. There's also the deep human need for community and belonging. Think about it. Life is overwhelming. People deal with uncertainty, fear, loss, and questions that don't have easy answers. Religion often steps in to provide a sense of certainty, structure, and hope. It tells people, you are part of something bigger. Your suffering has meaning. Your actions matter. That's powerful. Even if the specific belief might look strange to outsiders, the emotional comfort it gives is very real. When you zoom out, you realize that these patterns repeat across cultures and time. Ancient Egyptians believed pharaohs were literal gods. Medieval Europeans believed touching a saint's relic could heal illness. In parts of the world today, people still believe holy water can cure diseases or that certain rituals can guarantee wealth and success. The specific symbols change, but the psychological and social mechanisms stay the same. People are searching for connection, control, and meaning, and belief provides all three. This brings us to a key point. Calling a belief absurd from the outside doesn't stop it from being powerful on the inside. Sacred cows might look like a traffic problem to a tourist, but to believers, they are a sacred reminder of divine compassion. A dead pastor still being treated as a leader might sound bizarre to a skeptic, but to his followers, it feels like loyalty and faith. Once you see it through their eyes, you understand that belief is less about logic and more about the emotional glue that holds communities together. And here's the paradox. The very things that make belief so meaningful can also make it dangerous. When faith demands obedience at all costs, people may accept suffering, inequality, or even violence as necessary or holy. That's how rituals involving pain, deprivation, or sacrifice can persist, because they're framed as acts of devotion rather than harm. But to really grasp why people continue these practices, you have to look beyond the surface and recognize that what keeps them alive is not ignorance alone, but the deep human desire to belong, to trust, and to believe in something larger than oneself. And here's where it gets really fascinating. Religion isn't just about explaining the world or comforting people. It's also a tool for organizing societies. Before there were police, laws, or governments, people still needed ways to cooperate, settle disputes, and make sure everyone pulled their weight. Religion often filled that gap. If everyone believes that a god is watching and punishing wrongdoing, you don't need a huge enforcement system. Fear of divine punishment works surprisingly well to keep order, especially when the alternative is chaos. But it's not just fear that keeps people in line. Religion also offers hope, which is equally powerful. Life in the past was brutal. Disease, famine, wars, and accidents were everyday realities. Religion told people, this suffering isn't the end. There's a purpose. There's a better place waiting. Even if there's no evidence, the promise of something beyond the present moment gives people strength to endure hardships. That's why religions often flourish in difficult times. The more uncertainty and suffering people face, the more appealing a system that offers comfort, explanation, and structure becomes. And religion does more than comfort. It creates unity. Shared beliefs and rituals give people a sense of belonging and identity. When everyone around you believes in the same sacred symbols and stories, you instinctively trust them more. You fight alongside them, build communities together, and rely on them in crises. That sense of shared purpose can be life-saving in societies where cooperation is essential for survival. Religion, in that sense, is a kind of social glue, binding people together in ways that are both practical and deeply emotional. But here's the catch. The very thing that unites can also divide. Once people believe their God is the only true God, anyone who believes differently becomes a potential threat. Religious differences have fueled wars, persecution, and conquest throughout history. That sense of us versus them is a double-edged sword. It strengthens community from the inside, but can lead to conflict with outsiders. Another fascinating aspect is that religion provides certainty in a world full of uncertainty. Humans crave answers, but real answers often require time, effort, and complex reasoning. Religion cuts through all that by giving simple explanations. We exist because a God made us. Misfortune is a test. The righteous will be rewarded after death. That kind of clarity is comforting, even if it isn't necessarily true. It allows people to navigate a chaotic world with a sense of control, and that's incredibly compelling. Over time, religions didn't just offer explanations or comfort, they also protected themselves. As systems became more complex, rules multiplied. Who could question? What could be doubted? What could be said? All of this was carefully controlled. Doubt became dangerous because once people stopped believing, the whole structure could crumble. That's why many religions developed strong defense mechanisms, taboos, heresy laws, and threats of eternal punishment. They weren't just offering guidance, they were securing their survival. And then came the written word. Once stories were written down, they became fixed. No more fluid oral traditions where tales could adapt easily. These texts, often written centuries ago, were treated as perfect and eternal, even if they reflected outdated knowledge or old cultural norms. Questioning them wasn't just frowned upon, it was considered dangerous, sometimes punishable. And because these sacred texts became the backbone of authority, they gave religious leaders immense power to interpret, control, and enforce belief. Religions also absorbed ideas from other cultures, which made them more adaptable. Festivals, rituals, symbols, they could be reinterpreted rather than discarded. This flexibility helped religion spread faster. Like living organisms, religions evolved, taking in what worked and discarding what didn't. That's part of why you see similar themes across unrelated religions. Floods, chosen people, dying and rising gods, final judgment. These motifs resonate because they tap into universal human fears and hopes, not necessarily because one story is true. And here's the striking part. Religion often mirrors the power structures of the society it inhabits. In kingdoms, gods were kings. In warrior societies, gods were warriors. Inequality was often justified as divine will. The rich were blessed, the poor were tested. Religion could enforce social hierarchies while appearing morally or spiritually legitimate. Colonial powers exploited this too. Missionaries softened resistance, preparing the ground for conquest. Religion promised salvation while subtly taking land, freedom, and autonomy. In short, religion was both a comfort and a control system. Another reason religions became so central is that they gave people a sense of cosmic importance. Imagine living in a vast, unpredictable world where you often feel small and powerless. Religion told you that you mattered, that you were chosen, made in a God's image, or watched over by unseen forces. It shrank the universe down to human scale. Suddenly, life had purpose, and your existence felt meaningful. That feeling is incredibly comforting, and it's easy to see why people clung to it, even when reality seemed indifferent. Religion also offered structure and guidance. It told people how to live, who to marry, what to eat, when to pray. It gave rhythm to daily life, holidays to celebrate, rituals to follow. For many, this wasn't just convenient, it was grounding. Life was harsh and uncertain, and having clear rules and practices gave people stability. At the same time, though, that structure could be limiting. People who didn't fit, women, outsiders, thinkers, those who loved differently, were often marginalized. The rules weren't always about morality or truth, they were about maintaining order and control. Another key function of religion was explaining the unexplainable, especially suffering and death. Misfortune wasn't just bad luck, it was a test, a lesson, a divine sign. A sick person might think they were being spiritually tested. A poor person might believe their suffering was part of a larger plan. These explanations encouraged patience and obedience, but they also made people less likely to challenge injustice. When life is framed as a divine test, questioning authority or trying to change circumstances can feel like going against God's plan. Religions also created powerful psychological tools. Guilt, for example, wasn't just about behavior, it reinforced dependence. If people believed they were born flawed or constantly falling short, they looked to religious leaders for forgiveness, guidance, and approval. That created loyalty and made leaders' authority almost unassailable. Likewise, teachings about death, afterlife, reincarnation, transcendence offered comfort against one of humanity's greatest fears, even if these ideas weren't based on evidence. In essence, religion offered identity, belonging, and emotional safety. People grew up with rituals, prayers, and sacred texts that shaped how they saw the world, how their families treated them, and how their communities defined them. Leaving a religion wasn't just a change of belief. It could mean losing your family, your friends, your social framework. That emotional cost made doubt difficult, and questioning often carried real or perceived consequences, from social rejection to threats of eternal punishment. Another way religions maintained control was through ritual and repetition. Think about it: singing the same songs, reciting the same prayers, following the same routines over and over. It might seem simple, but repetition has a powerful psychological effect. It reinforces belief, builds a sense of belonging, and makes ideas stick. The content of the ritual often mattered less than the familiarity. People grew up with these practices. They became part of who they were. Leaving them behind felt like losing a piece of themselves. Religions also controlled knowledge and interpretation. Sacred texts were often written in languages most people couldn't read. Special intermediaries, priests, monks, or scholars, were the gatekeepers. Ordinary people had to go through them to access divine wisdom. That created dependence and discouraged independent thinking. Some cultures even taught that thoughts themselves could be sinful. Doubting, questioning, or thinking differently wasn't just frowned upon, it was dangerous. People learned to police not only their actions, but their own minds. Another important function was adapting to social and political structures. In societies ruled by kings, gods were often depicted as kings. In war-driven cultures, gods were warriors. Religion justified inequality, teaching that the rich were blessed and the poor tested. Missionaries and conquerors used religion to pacify conquered populations, reframing submission as salvation. It was rarely peaceful. Religion often rode on the back of empires, softening resistance and legitimizing control. Even as science and evidence-based knowledge advanced, religions didn't simply disappear. Some resisted outright, banning books, punishing thinkers, or attacking scientific discoveries. Others adapted, softening rules or reinterpreting texts to stay relevant. But at its core, religion continued to serve the same functions, providing certainty, comfort, and influence. It gave people answers for uncertainty, structure for chaos, and meaning in a harsh world. Another major way religions shaped societies was by defining roles, rules, and social norms. Early on, women often had strong positions in community life. But as religions became institutionalized, leadership roles were almost always held by men. Sacred texts were written, interpreted, and enforced by men, often giving them authority over women. Rules about dress, speech, family, and sexuality were not divine truths in themselves. They were social preferences dressed up as sacred commands. Religion also used guilt as a tool. The idea of sin wasn't just about right or wrong behavior. It was about creating dependency. If people believed they were inherently flawed or constantly falling short, they turned to religious leaders for forgiveness. That gave the leaders a product they could always sell: absolution. This system made followers rely on the institution and reinforced hierarchical control. Death and the fear of it was another powerful driver. Religion offered narratives about the afterlife, reincarnation, or transcendence. These stories weren't based on evidence, but on human desire, the wish that death isn't the end. By giving people hope and comfort, religion helped them endure suffering. But there was a downside. If this life was just a test or stepping stone, suffering could be seen as noble, poverty as spiritual, and injustice as divinely ordained. Questioning authority or trying to change the system could be framed as going against a divine plan. Religions also justified violence and expansion. Leaders often claimed wars, conquests, or suppression of others were commanded by gods. Holy wars, inquisitions, and forced conversions were framed as sacred duties, making them harder to question. Wrapping political or social goals in religious language turned human agendas into divine missions. At the same time, rituals played a key role in shaping the mind. Repeated practices, prayers, chants, ceremonies reinforced identity, comfort, and belonging. Over time, these rituals became part of who people were, creating emotional ties that were difficult to break. If you were born into a religion, it wasn't just a set of beliefs, it was your culture, your family, your entire worldview. Leaving it could feel like losing everything you knew. Religions punished doubt and reinforced conformity. Skeptics were often silenced, sometimes violently, sometimes socially. Doubt was contagious, so making it a sin or dangerous act protected the system. Sacred texts were often in languages few understood, interpretations were controlled by elites, and access to divine truth was limited. People learned to police not only their actions, but their thoughts, internalizing the rules in the deepest way possible. This combination of control, comfort, ritual, and identity is why religions were so resilient. Even when scientific discoveries challenged old beliefs, the Earth isn't the center of the universe, Species evolve, diseases have natural causes. Many religions found ways to adapt without changing their core function, providing certainty, structuring society, and maintaining influence. Religion also shaped everyday life in ways people might not even notice. It offered structure: when to eat, when to pray, who to marry, and even how to interact with neighbors. For many, it wasn't just a belief system, it was a blueprint for living. That structure could be comforting, giving people a sense of order in an unpredictable world. But it could also be limiting. Those who didn't fit the mold, women, outsiders, freethinkers, or people who loved differently, often found themselves marginalized, excluded, or punished. Another repeating pattern is how religions reflected the fears and needs of the people who created them. When disease struck, it was often seen as divine punishment. Natural disasters were blamed on human sin. Religion offered quick answers that made people feel protected from uncertainty, but these answers sometimes slowed progress. Instead of studying germs, people made sacrifices. Instead of preparing for earthquakes, they built shrines. These responses were comforting, but they often delayed real solutions to real problems. Gender roles were also deeply influenced. In early societies, women might have held authority, but institutionalized religions often consolidated power in the hands of men. Texts written and interpreted by men were used to justify control over women. Rules governing clothing, speech, family life, and sexuality were rarely about divine truth. They were socially constructed norms presented as sacred. This helped maintain social hierarchies while giving them the appearance of divine approval. Religion also created dependency through guilt and moral obligation. The concept of sin encouraged people to constantly seek forgiveness, making them reliant on religious leaders and institutions. Misfortune was interpreted as a test, a lesson, or divine punishment. A poor person might feel destined to suffer. A sick person might see illness as spiritual correction. These ideas encouraged passivity, making injustice more bearable and therefore easier to maintain. Religious rituals reinforced identity and loyalty. Repetition, ceremony, and shared practices trained the mind to associate religion with comfort, community, and safety. These rituals became embedded in personal identity, making belief feel inseparable from who someone was. Questioning or leaving the religion could feel like losing not just faith, but family, community, and self. Finally, religions were remarkably resilient. Even in the face of scientific discoveries and social change, they adapted. Texts were reinterpreted, rules softened, and traditions reframed. Yet the core purpose remained: to provide certainty, offer comfort, and maintain influence over individuals and communities. Religion wasn't created just to control people, though. It also reflected basic human needs: the need to belong, to understand, to feel safe. But once these needs became institutionalized, they hardened into systems that resisted curiosity, challenged new ideas, and perpetuated themselves for centuries. Religion often grows fastest during moments of crisis. Think about it. When societies collapse, when chaos takes over, when fear spreads, people naturally look for structure, for answers that make sense of the world. Religion steps in with ready-made explanations. Suddenly there's a story for everything: why bad things happen, why life feels unfair, what comes after death. And in times of fear, certainty feels like survival. That's why religious belief can surge even in the hardest times. It's less about truth and more about emotional refuge. But it's not always just about comfort. Religion has also served as a tool to resist oppression. In places where political power was brutal, religious stories offered hope, dignity, and a sense of purpose. It gave people strength when society stripped it away. Yet, the same structures that empowered the oppressed could later be used to control them once religions became institutionalized. Prophets turned into leaders, revolutions became regimes, freedom became law. And suddenly, the very force that once inspired liberation became a tool of order and authority. Even today, many people are taught that without religion, life has no meaning, or that morality collapses without God. But this idea wasn't discovered. It was created by religions themselves to protect their influence. By convincing people that abandoning faith meant abandoning goodness, religions ensured loyalty, often out of fear rather than genuine belief. One particularly clever strategy was to make disbelief feel dangerous. Consequences weren't just social rejection, They were eternal, rebirth into lowly states, disconnection from the divine, eternal torment. The fear of these outcomes could keep generations locked into belief, even when the reasons for believing no longer made sense. It's not that followers weren't sincere. Many genuinely believed. But sincerity isn't the same as truth, and that early conditioning made doubt feel almost impossible. Religion also explains personal struggles. Misfortune isn't random. It's a test, a lesson, a divine message. A poor person might internalize suffering as destiny. A sick person might see illness as spiritual correction. These ideas encourage passivity, turning people away from solutions and making societal injustices easier to uphold. When help was offered, it often came with conditions: obedience, donations, conformity. Blessings weren't guaranteed, but following the rules always reinforced the system. And perhaps most importantly, religion was woven into the very fabric of life. It shaped art, law, marriage, politics, festivals, everything. Even in modern secular societies, its influence lingers in symbols, holidays, and customs. Religion offered roles and purpose, too: saints, monks, prophets, martyrs. A poor man could gain status by preaching. A woman could earn respect by dedicating herself to the church. These roles created meaning, not necessarily by uncovering truth, but by navigating the system effectively. Part 12. Religion didn't just shape belief and identity, it also built entire economies. Temples, tithes, donations, pilgrimages, relics, land ownership, these weren't just spiritual activities. Religious institutions often became wealthy and powerful entities, sometimes the largest landowners in a region. They collected wealth tax-free, controlled trade routes, and influenced kings and rulers. In many ways, religion functioned as a political and economic machine, not just a spiritual guide. And when science began offering better explanations for natural phenomena, many religions didn't fade quietly. Instead, they often resisted or attacked scientific discoveries. Books were banned, thinkers exiled or silenced, and pioneers like Galileo were threatened with torture. This wasn't always about faith. It was about protecting power. The authority religion had over societies felt threatened by the impartial, evidence-based methods of science. Despite all this, religion proved incredibly adaptable. Over centuries, it found ways to reinterpret texts, soften rules, and adjust rituals just enough to stay relevant. Yet at its core, the functions largely remained the same: to provide certainty, comfort, and maintain influence. It's important to remember that religion also reflected basic human needs. We crave belonging, understanding, and safety. Religion met those needs in ways early humans could grasp. But once these needs became institutionalized, the structures hardened. They resisted change, curiosity, and even the pursuit of new knowledge, often in direct opposition to the very questions that inspired their creation in the first place. One interesting pattern is that religions often grow fastest during times of crisis. When societies collapse, when chaos spreads, when people lose control over their lives, religion steps in because it offers structure and ready-made answers. People turn to it for guidance, for hope, for something familiar when everything else feels unstable. It's not that religion suddenly becomes truer during hard times. It's that human emotion craves certainty, and that craving is powerful. Religion doesn't only respond to fear, it also provides comfort and dignity. In places where political power is brutal or life is harsh, religious stories can give people a sense of meaning and personal value. They offer hope, a narrative that life is more than just struggle, and a sense that there's a greater purpose. Yet here's the catch: the very tool that helps people resist oppression can also become a tool of control once it's institutionalized. Prophets may become popes, revolutions may harden into regimes, and stories meant to inspire can end up reinforcing power hierarchies. Even today, many are taught that without religion, life has no meaning, or that without belief in God, morality collapses. But that idea isn't universal truth. It's a concept created by religions themselves to protect their influence. By convincing people that leaving religion means losing everything good in life, institutions ensure loyalty, often out of fear rather than genuine conviction. One of the clever ways religions have protected themselves over time is by making doubt feel dangerous. Doubting isn't just questioning what someone else says. It's framed as a sin or moral failure, something that could affect your soul or your place in the afterlife. The consequences of disbelief are painted as eternal: Not just social rejection, but eternal torment, rebirth in a lowly state, or disconnection from the divine. That fear alone is enough to keep generations locked into belief, even when they no longer understand why. It's important to remember, this isn't about forcing everyone to be dishonest. Many believers are sincere, deeply committed to their faith. But sincerity doesn't automatically mean correctness. People can be convinced of things that aren't true, especially if they've been raised from childhood never to question them. Early conditioning is powerful. Teach someone a set of beliefs before they develop critical thinking, reinforce it constantly, and by adulthood, belief feels inseparable from identity. Questioning it feels like tearing yourself apart. Religion also provides a framework to explain personal struggles. Misfortune isn't random. It's a test, a lesson, a sign. If a person is poor, sick, or suffering, religion can make them feel there's a reason, something meaningful behind the hardship. While this can comfort, it also encourages passivity. People are more likely to accept their circumstances rather than challenge them, blaming fate or divine will instead of acting to improve their lives. And when religious leaders offer help, it's often conditional: obedience, donations, conformity. The reward is promised in the future, maybe in another life, reinforcing the system and keeping control. Another reason religion has stuck around so strongly is that it's woven into nearly every aspect of life. It's not just about what you believe. It shapes art, law, marriage, politics, and social customs. Even today, in countries that call themselves secular, you can still see the influence of religion in holidays, symbols, language, and traditions. This makes leaving or questioning religion feel like more than a personal choice. It can feel like betraying your heritage, your culture, even your identity. Religion also gave people roles and opportunities that might have been hard to access otherwise. Someone poor or marginalized could rise in status by becoming a preacher, monk, saint, or prophet. Women, for example, could gain recognition and respect through religious devotion, even in societies where other options were limited. These roles provided purpose and meaning, not because they discovered ultimate truth, but because they played the system well. And let's not forget the economic power that came with religion. Temples, tithes, pilgrimages, relics, land ownership. Religious institutions controlled wealth and resources, sometimes more than kings or governments. They influenced trade, politics, and even the rulers themselves. Religion wasn't just spiritual. It was a political and economic machine with the ability to shape societies in ways that went far beyond faith. De La Fun 16. Part 16. As science began to advance, religion didn't just quietly fade away. It often resisted, sometimes aggressively. Books were banned, thinkers were silenced, and innovators like Galileo faced threats of torture or exile. This wasn't always about faith. It was about control. Religion had built an entire system of authority, and scientific evidence threatened that system. Science didn't care about tradition. It cared about proof. And that's dangerous for any institution built on unquestioned authority. Even today, religion adapts. It rebrands itself, calling itself spiritual but not religious, using modern language to appeal to contemporary audiences. Yet the core functions remain: shaping belief, reinforcing identity, discouraging doubt. That's why religion persists. It's not because it's necessarily right, but because it has evolved to fit whatever society needs it to be. And here's an important point. Many people still believe, not because they're forced, but because religion offers comfort and stability. Life is messy and uncertain, and belief can make it feel a little safer. But comfort and truth are not always the same thing. Religion provides answers to life's big questions, often without evidence, and people cling to them because emotion is more immediate than logic. Religion also played a huge role in shaping morality, social norms, and human behavior. Many people think morality comes from religion, but if you look closely, moral ideas often emerged from human experience, not divine command. Concepts like fairness, kindness, and empathy existed in various societies, regardless of their specific beliefs. In fact, many social progress movements, the abolition of slavery, women's rights, recognition of LGBTQ+ relationships, often challenged religious institutions, not emerged from them. Still, religion convinces people that without it, society would collapse, that without God, people wouldn't act morally. This is part of its self-preservation. By creating a link between belief and goodness, it discourages doubt and keeps followers in line. Fear of losing eternal rewards or facing punishment encourages conformity, even when logic or personal observation might suggest otherwise. Religion also explains personal struggles in ways that encourage passivity. Misfortune isn't random, it's a test, a lesson, a sign. A poor person might think they are destined to suffer. A sick person might believe their illness is a spiritual trial. This mindset makes it easier for systems of power to maintain control because people are less likely to challenge injustice or seek real-world solutions. Moreover, religious help often comes with strings attached: obedience, conformity, donations. Blessings are offered, but only if you follow the rules. It's transactional. If things go well, it's divine favor. If they go poorly, it's a test. Either way, the system protects itself. Religion embeds itself into daily life, from art and law to holidays and social roles, making it difficult to step away without feeling like you're betraying your roots. Religions didn't just shape beliefs, they shaped entire social and economic systems. Temples, tithes, donations, pilgrimages, relics, and land ownership created wealth and influence. In many periods of history, religious institutions were the largest landowners, collecting wealth tax-free and controlling trade routes. They weren't just spiritual authorities, they were political and economic powerhouses. When science started offering better explanations for natural phenomena, religion often resisted and attacked it. Books were banned, thinkers were punished, Galileo was threatened with torture. This wasn't about faith, it was about maintaining control. Science represented evidence over tradition, and that threatened a system built on authority rather than proof. Yet, even today, many people still believe, not necessarily because they were forced, but because religion offers comfort in a complex, uncertain world. Life is difficult, and belief can provide meaning, security, and a sense of order. But comfort and truth aren't the same thing. A soft pillow helps you sleep, but it doesn't explain the stars. Religions continue to adapt. They use modern language, rebrand themselves as spiritual rather than religious, and embrace technology. Yet at their core, the functions remain the same: controlling belief, shaping identity, discouraging doubt, and preserving influence. Some people argue that religion gave humanity morality, but if you look closer, morality often came from human experience, not divine command. Concepts like fairness, empathy, and kindness can be found in societies with very different beliefs. In fact, many moral breakthroughs, the abolition of slavery, the advancement of women's rights, recognition of same-sex relationships, often happened in spite of religious institutions, not because of them. Yet, many still believe that without religion, society would collapse, that without God, people would have no reason to act morally. This is not an absolute truth. It's a narrative religions created to protect themselves. By instilling the idea that giving up faith means giving up everything good, religion keeps people aligned through fear and tradition rather than through reason or genuine understanding. One of the most clever ways religions protected themselves was by creating consequences for disbelief that extend beyond social rejection: eternal torment, low rebirth, disconnection from the divine. These consequences make leaving a religion feel dangerous not just in this life, but forever. Generations can remain locked into belief, even if the original reasons no longer make sense. It's not that all religious people are dishonest or insincere. Many are deeply sincere. But sincerity doesn't guarantee accuracy. People can be firmly convinced of things that aren't true, especially when conditioned from childhood to never question them. Early and constant reinforcement makes belief part of one's identity, so doubting it feels like tearing oneself apart. Religion also offered explanations for personal struggles. Misfortune wasn't just bad luck, it was a test, a lesson, or a divine sign. This kind of framing made people less likely to challenge their circumstances. A poor person might believe suffering was meant to be endured. A sick person might see illness as a spiritual trial. These narratives encouraged passivity and compliance, steering people away from practical solutions and making societal injustices easier to maintain. Even when religious leaders provided help, it often came with conditions: obedience, conformity, donations, rituals. Aid wasn't free, it was transactional. Do this, believe this, follow this, and maybe blessings would come. Maybe not in this life, but later. It's a powerful system because it can't be disproven. If life goes well, it's a blessing. If not, it's a test. Either way, the structure defends itself. Another reason religion persisted is that it was woven into every part of life. Art, law, marriage, holidays, customs, religion shaped the foundation of societies. Even today, in supposedly secular countries, you can still see its influence in symbols, language, and traditions. It wasn't just about belief, it was about heritage, culture, and identity, which made leaving religion feel like betraying your roots, even if the original stories no longer held truth. Religion also offered roles and purpose. People could become saints, monks, martyrs, or prophets. A poor man could gain status by preaching. A woman could be revered by dedicating herself to the church. These roles provided meaning and social recognition, not because the truths were real, but because people played the system well. Religious institutions created entire economies: temples, tithes, pilgrimages, relics, land ownership. They became wealthy and powerful, often controlling trade routes and influencing kings. Religion was not just spiritual, it was political and economic. When science began offering better explanations, religion resisted. It banned books, punished thinkers, and threatened dissenters, not purely out of faith, but to protect authority. Galileo and others faced exile, torture, or execution because evidence threatened the system. Yet, despite these challenges, many people still believe today. Sometimes not because they were forced, but because belief provides comfort. Life is difficult, and humans crave meaning, but comfort and truth aren't the same. Religion continues to adapt using modern language and technology, rebranding itself as spiritual rather than religious. But the core functions remain: control belief, shape identity, and discourage doubt. Finally, it's important to see that religion was created by humans to meet human needs, to explain nature, manage fear, structure power, justify rules, bind communities, and protect hierarchies. It was built not by gods, but by people, shaped by struggle, confusion, and the desire for meaning. Once created, it took on a life of its own, spreading, evolving, merging, splitting, developing rituals and doctrines, and passing down through generations who often didn't know its origin but still revered it as sacred. But recognizing the human origin of religion doesn't mean we must continue following it unquestioningly. What once served a purpose might no longer serve us today. The world has changed. We have better tools to understand reality, and we no longer need to invent stories to make sense of the sky or accept suffering as inherently sacred. Letting go of religion doesn't mean losing meaning. It means finding meaning in reality, in kindness without fear, in purpose without myth, and in life rather than an imagined afterlife. The stories people created long ago were shaped by the limits of their understanding, not by foolishness. They were trying. Today, we know more. And perhaps the most human thing is not just to create stories, but to outgrow them when they no longer fit, seeking truth, understanding, and meaning in ways that reflect what we actually know, not just what we were told.